what happened on day 2 in the James Craig case. James Craig is a dentist from Colorado who is on trial for allegedly poisoning his wife. She passed away, and now we're at trial. 2 years later, I'm going to tell you all about what happened on day 2 right after this intro. Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Rebecca, your host of Crafting and Crime Daily. This is a show where I recap live trials, so you have something to listen to while you're crafting. Currently covering the case of Dr. James Craig, former Dr. James Craig. He is a dentist practicing in Aurora, Colorado, and we're going to hear all about that practice today. But he's on trial for allegedly poisoning and murdering his wife, Angela Craig. They were married for 23 years, 6 kids, and here we are on day 2 of a murder trial. This is what happens when you can't resolve domestic issues in a civil way. All right, we end up in court. So, day 2. The first person on the stand, let me just back up. I'm going to backtrack just a little because I'm not sure I included this information in yesterday's video. But the first few witnesses after the opening statement established they were treaters. They established one that on March 6th and March 9th, when she came into the emergency room, no one could figure out what was wrong with her. And, that all the tests were coming back negative. And the ER does not run tests for poisoning. It's just not something they do. Why not? I don't know. Maybe they should. But then there was a nurse that testified, and this is probably the most important thing that came out of that testimony, is that when you go into the hospital and there's a screening that takes place, and it's a suicide screening. And they basically want to know if you're going to harm yourself or not, or you're having thoughts and that kind of thing, or are you safe at home? There's all kinds of screening issues that they have to do in the emergency room to make sure you're okay. And they did that with Angela Craig, and there were no warnings for suicidal ideation on that visit, on either of those visits. So I thought that was interesting. Okay. Now let's go to the current day 2. Another nurse on the stand who took care of Angela Craig on her final admission, the one on the 15th. And she was admitted because she had decreased oxygen levels. Well, she went in the room to check on Angela Craig. I didn't get a time on this, and please bear with me. I'm not watching this trial. I'm having to piece this together through other people that are actually in the courtroom. This case is not being streamed, even though it's super high profile, not being streamed. And it's just such an interesting case. So she's admitted for low O2 levels, and the nurse goes in to check on her and sees that she's pale, sweaty, and unresponsive. So they an alarm goes off, and she has to remove, James Craig is in the room, so she removes him from the room. Then on cross-examination, the defense established that, James Craig was sleeping when you went in there to check on her. And yes, he was, and he wouldn't have known when you were going to go in there. No, they don't know the nurse's schedule and when they're going to check on patients. Then the next person to testify was a woman named Caitlin Romero. The next 2 witnesses are so important, so you're not going to want to miss these. Caitlin Romero worked at the Summerbrook Dental Group, and let me just explain, if I can. James Craig had a dental practice. His partner, I don't know how he's a partner, Ryan Redfern, was in this dental practice, but they both had separate names for their practice. Fit to Smile was the name of Ryan Redfern's dental practice, and Summerbrook Dental Group was the name of James Craig's dental practice. So Caitlin Romero worked as the director of operations for the Summerbrook Dental Group. She was in charge of like staffing needs and uh, supplies. So on March 6th, she said they opened, or they don't open, but at 6:45 a.m., they all come in for a meeting. Yay! Who doesn't want to come in at 6:45 a.m.? They all have a meeting before the practice opens for the day. And James Craig was late for the meeting that day. And when he did arrive, he said his wife wasn't feeling well. They had both worked out together and she wasn't feeling well. And then he joked and said, oh, maybe I put too much protein in her protein shake. Coffee, sorry. So she said later that day, he left to drive to the urgent care. So that day, the office closes at 4 o'clock. Everybody leaves. She thinks she's there by herself. She said she was the only person there. And then that evening, she heard someone trying to enter the office. So she looked down the hallway. She sees James Craig on his phone, and she assumes that he's headed for his office. So later in the evening, when she goes to leave through a back door, she sees that the lights are off in his office. So she just assumes, okay, he's already gone. However, before she reaches the door to exit, she sees that there's lights on. And in the exam room number 9, which is down the hall, and she sees James Craig working on a computer that they use for radiology and patient records. And, you know, he's using that computer. And all of this is like sending off alarm bells in her head. So as she's driving home, he texts her and he says, I ordered a personal package. It's going to be delivered to the office. Do not open it. Then that week, she said James Craig was out of the office several times because his wife was in the hospital. On March 9th, he tells this witness, Romero, that he didn't think his wife was going to make it through the night. Now, March 9th is the second time she goes to the hospital. Doesn't think she's going to make it through the night. On March 13th, the office receives this personal package. And another employee, it comes in a box. You don't know what's in the box. It's addressed to James Craig. This employee opens the box, and there's this silver foil sealed package. And the box has biohazard all over it. Now, they were expecting a delivery of fentanyl. So Romero, she's thinking, okay, maybe this is the fentanyl. So she checks the invoice, and the invoice says potassium cyanide. So she puts the silver thing back in the box and then puts it on his desk. And she did testify that she had never seen potassium cyanide delivered to their office. And then she decides she's going to do a little research on symptoms of potassium cyanide poisoning and realizes that, hey, these match the symptoms that James Craig is describing that his wife has. So then on March 15th, James Craig, he leaves work early because he says his wife needs to go back to the hospital. She had just been discharged on March 14th from her March 9th visit. So on March 15th, he leaves work early. Again, he tells Romero, I don't think my wife's going to make it through the night. So as she was leaving the office, she decides, I'm going to call somebody about this. So she calls another director of operations for the Fit to Smile practice, and she tells her suspicions. She then calls Michelle Redfern. Dr. Michelle Redfern is married to Ryan Redfern, which is James Craig's partner. But Michelle Redfern was friends with Angela Craig. Their husbands had gone to dental school together over in Kansas City, and they became friends. They all end up going to Colorado. So She calls Michelle and she tells Michelle her suspicions. And she then speaks with Ryan. She tells him her suspicions. And later on, she admits she told him to a detective. So the detective took pictures of all the texts that he sent to her. So on cross-examination, it comes out she said she had an emotional relationship with James Craig. Now, I don't know what this means, emotional relationship. I wish I had heard the actual testimony. I'm assuming if it was a sexual relationship, they would have said, or I don't know if they mean emotional like outside business relationship, like personal relationship. I don't know what they mean by emotional relationship. So she said, yeah, we had an emotional relationship or have an emotional relationship. I don't know how she said, whether she said that she had or have, or whether it was ongoing, where they would share personal information about their lives and struggles that they were having. So maybe just good friends. I don't know. So when James later, he gets arrested on the 19th. For some reason, this woman, Romero, she's got to work from home. And I think because they closed the practice for a little while, but she's got to work from home, and she takes James Craig's old computer and she says, no, I don't know his password. And yes, there could have been personal information on it. I don't have his password. So she ends up turning that computer over to the police. She said she did not tell law enforcement about her relationship with James Craig because she didn't feel it was relevant. She knew that they were having issues in their marriage, but she didn't pry. The text messages apparently say that he needs to put his wife's needs over work. Okay. Then I'll redirect. The prosecution goes through these text messages from before March 6th and after March 6th and shows that they're all business related. Okay. Then we have a very important witness on the stand, Dr. Michelle Redfern. Now, I say doctor because she is a PhD in nursing. Now, if you get a PhD, you're referred to as doctor. A doctorate in nursing, that's a lot of education. So apparently during her testimony, she was looking directly at James Craig. So she met Angela Craig, like I said before, when their husbands were in dental school. She explained the dental practice. She learned through her husband that Angela Craig was ill. She reached out to Angela Craig, didn't get any response, so she reaches out to James Craig. Here's what he says back to her. Thanks, Michelle. It's been pretty rough. Not having any answers, I got really nervous. They did many tests. So at this point, she's thinking, okay, he doesn't know what's wrong with her. Then they show the whole series of texts, screenshots of the whole series of texts, including one text to Michelle from James Craig that says, if it wasn't my wife, this would be a fun puzzle to try to solve. Okay. Sort of inappropriate, I would think. Okay. So then Michelle learns that Angela's crashing on March 15th in the hospital. So she goes to the hospital to visit her. She's gone now from the ER to the ICU. And then while driving to the hospital, this is when she hears from Romero and she hears the story about the potassium cyanide. So she admits that she did not tell anybody at the hospital about what she learned about the potassium cyanide because she knew that her husband knew and that he was going to get there first. She was stuck in traffic and she felt like he was going to get to the hospital first and that he would tell them. So when she gets there, she is in the waiting room with James Craig and her own husband, and that's where she learns that her friend Angela Craig is brain dead. So that evening, they left the hospital, her and her husband, they leave together to head home, and they get a phone call. So the phone call connects to the Bluetooth of the vehicle, so both people can hear what's going on. The phone call's from James Craig. Um, James says he heard some distressing news at the hospital and wanted to discuss it with them. So at this point, Ryan, Michelle's husband, asks James Craig about the package, and James tells him, "Oh, I was buying a ring for Angela." And Ryan says, "Listen, I know it was potassium cyanide." You know, he calls him out on it, and we don't use that in dentistry. Why would you have that delivered to the office? And James' response was, "Oh, Ryan, what have you done?" So eventually, during this conversation, James Craig admits, yes, he ordered the potassium cyanide because he was purchasing it for his wife. Because you have to be a licensed, you have to have some kind of credentials to buy this stuff. And I think we're going to hear later on how he actually accomplished buying the cyanide. But she asked him to buy it, and he said this was a game of chicken. She was suicidal. He was going to buy it for her, and I don't know what dare her to do it. I don't know. It's like when somebody says, "I'm going to kill myself," and you're like, "Which knife can I hand you?" And you know they're not going to grab a knife out of your hand anyway. So she did say that she could not remember any communications that she had had with um, Angela in March that would indicate to her that Angela was suicidal. She said Angela was not a big risk taker and not a gambler. Now, on cross examination, she admits that once these two couples moved to Colorado, they became more distant. But they had small children, they're busy with their children's lives. So she says, Angela was the kind of person you could go lunch with and spend 3 hours in a conversation. So she knew through her husband that the Craigs were having marital struggles, and but her friend was a very private person. She never voiced any of this to Michelle. She just wasn't one that would share her problems. On redirect, the question came up, if why wouldn't James Craig tell you if he bought it for his wife? Why wouldn't he just, you're all discussing this. I'm assuming all day long in the waiting room, you're trying to figure out what happened to her. Why didn't he come up and say, "Well, I just bought her some cyanide because she asked me to"? He never says that he purchased this for his wife. I never said, anyway. So then we have some other witnesses that took the stand. A security specialist from King Super. It's like a Dillon's, Kroger supermarket. And, it's a grocery store. So, but it has a pharmacy in it. So this guy was asked to pull all of the receipts that he had, anything he had on James Craig. So he found 2 credit cards of James Craig, James Craig's name on it, pulled all the receipts for those credit cards. On March 8th, the credit card was used by someone, we don't know who, for 12 packages of Visine Eye Drops. And then again on March 9th, 7 more packages of Visine Eye Drops, which is terahydrazoline, which was in her system on autopsy. But the jury does not know that yet. So we don't know who was using those credit cards, but they used the self-checkout to purchase them. The next person on the stand is a security personnel from the hospital, and they were asked to track down surveillance footage from the time that Angela Craig enters the hospital on the 15th and all the visitors that she had access to her. So this was all on a video, but it was not shown to the jury. It was admitted into evidence, but it was not shown to the jury. And I'm wondering if this video shows James Craig doing something suspicious. This guy said that there were a couple of visits on the 15th from James Craig, and on the second visit, he was carrying a plastic bag. Now, they have metal detectors at this hospital, which is a fabulous idea. But he said, you know, if it was in a syringe with a needle, the metal detector would not pick that up. The next and final person on the stand is someone that works at the jail, and her job is to open letters. And in April of 2024, so roughly a year later, she opens a letter, and there are suspicious contents. And I'll tell you what this is, but I don't know what the context of this is. I don't know who the letter was to, who the letter was from. I'm assuming from James Craig. Now, if my memory serves me, this was something he mailed to someone else. They didn't accept the letter, didn't open it, didn't accept it, and returned it to the jail. I could be wrong about that. Or see, I'm guessing. I don't know. Maybe this is something she opened before it got sent out. In any case, he's offering free dental care and cash for procuring people to be witnesses in his case. And then there's a letter within a letter describing various rules for attractive women to play as witnesses. And they'll use code words like Harry Potter and Captain America. I mean, this guy's losing his mind in jail. And then the letter directed fake witnesses to say that Angela Cooper approached them and wanted to frame her husband for murder to help her gain leverage in divorce proceedings. This makes no sense. If she's murdered, she don't need a divorce, does she? Yeah, anyway, that's what was in the letter. And that's the testimony for day 2. Listen, I hope you enjoyed this video and enjoyed bringing it to you. I will see you in tomorrow's video. I apologize that there was no live yesterday. I'm going through some personal struggles at home, and those will resolve eventually. And I will see you in the next video. Love you. Bye.